Welcome back everyone to another video on the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going to be going over and talking about Baizhu. We've made our way through the different character archives. We've started at the most recent characters, starting with Sijun and Claran, and we've made our way now all the way over to Baizhu. So now, talking about him, first and foremost, let's go ahead and look at his talents as a character. Now, talking about Baizhu really quickly, you're mainly going to be using him as your healer. Looking in terms of talents, looking at all three of the different normal attack, the skill, and the burst talents, you're going to want to focus into the skill and the burst talent the most. The normal attack talent doesn't really do anything for you, it's just extra damage, so you don't really actually have to touch it at all in terms of leveling it. But in the skill and the burst, I would say that this is where I would really put most of your time and energy into, obviously, but there isn't really one over the other that personally for me I like more than the other. I would really put them constantly leveling them up together as you start to increase Baizhu's level and get through more of his talents upgraded. I would really just say to keep them at the same level. If they're at 9, one of them's at 9, bring them both to 9. If you crown one of them, I would just say to try to crown both of them if you can. Both of these talents are really good, and it's where obviously you're going to get a lot of your healing from the burst and the skill, so honestly both of these are going to be pretty good for you. But let's go ahead and jump into what they actually are going to be doing. So with the skill, it's pretty basic. You're going to be throwing this little thing out that is a Gossamer sprite, and it can hit up to 3 opponents. It deals Dendro damage. Now the biggest thing here is that even if it doesn't hit opponents, it will still do the healing that is given through the skill. But if you hit up to 3 opponents, it can basically just act as application. You're not really looking for a lot of damage there, but it's mainly just application as well as, hitting multiple targets. So there you go. And then it will, as soon as it returns, deal certain amounts of healing to the actual characters on your party. So keep this in mind as well, that this is going to be all nearby party members based on Baizhu's max HP, so it does do a full party heal, and the burst is the same as well, which we'll talk about in a second. Now at level 8, this will be at 12.8% of your max HP plus 1445. Once again, a lot of extra healing on what you're going to be doing for him. Depends on how much healing or HP that you have. It does have a little bit of a higher cooldown, but since the burst is going to be doing lots of healing for you, and this is a pretty nice number as well for healing, it's really not going to be crazy and terrible for the cooldown that it has. So going ahead and talking about the burst, when you use the burst, you will enter the pulsing clarity state that basically just creates a seamless shield. And at this point, these seamless shields are not necessarily something that you're going to be sitting there and trying to grind to, make them extremely good, because every 2.5 seconds, they will destroy themselves and go right back on to creating another shield. Basically, even though this is based off of his max HP, a lot of his shields aren't super strong. The whole idea, though, for these shields kind of going on and off, I think is just more or less a mechanic to constantly heal your character. Basically, it's just bits of healing that's going to be happening. And every time that it breaks or shatters, it will send out a Gossamer sprite similar to what the skill does to actually heal your characters as well with some application. So there's some pretty good things that comes out. They're called Spirit Veins in here instead. So you'll be healing yourself as well as doing some application. So his burst is pretty nice, especially for non-Dendro carries that might be on your team. And this will occur for the healing and the obviously changing and attacking the opponents. It will occur when a character is under the protection of a seamless shield and a new seamless shield is created. Once again, every 2.5 seconds, they're basically destroying themselves and then recreating a new one almost instantaneously. Also, when the seamless shield's effects are expired or when it is shattered, it will also do the same as well. So you're going to be constantly healing. It's at least, once again, every 2.5 seconds is when that's going to be happening. And if one of those shields is broken, then it will create that healing as well. Now, the entire duration of it is going to be 14 seconds. And with the cooldown being at 20 seconds, like I said before, even though this is at 10 seconds, you can get a good skill in, a burst in while it's doing constant healing, and then go back to the skill once you need it after the 10 seconds, and hopefully you should have enough energy. And this does have a high energy cost, talking about just putting him maybe possibly with another Dendro character, which we will get to in the team section. Looking at some passive talents that you're going to want to know, specifically the first passive talent is pretty good because it states that Baizhu has different effects according to the current HP of the current active character that's on the field. It states that on one end, when the HP of the active character is less than 50%, Baizhu will gain a 20% healing bonus, and when the HP is equal to or more than 50%, Baizhu will then gain a 25% Dendro damage bonus. So honestly, really, the biggest thing here is really just getting the healing bonus. Once again, damage isn't necessarily Baizhu's forte, and you're really not going to be really going for it too much anyways, but it just does allow, once again, just making sure that if you are under that 50% with the active character, those off-field healing from the burst and even the skill, if you switch off to the character, you can actually be able to get some good extra healing in there as well. Now, talking about the second passive talent, it states that characters who are healed by the Seamless Shields from the burst will gain the Year of Verdant Favor effect. Each 1000 max HP that Baizhu possesses that does not exceed 50,000 max HP will increase the Burning, Bloom, Hyper Bloom, and Burgeon reaction damage dealt by these characters by 2%, and will increase the damage bonus provided by Aggravate and Spread by 0.8%, and this effect can last for 6 whole seconds. So once again, keeping this in mind, this is really going to be focused on doing a lot of your teams, obviously considering he's a Dendro character. Once again, talking about teams that he's going to be having. This is actually, if you look at this, if it's for each 1000 max HP, he gets a 2% boost to let's talk about burning. Then for instance, if you have a burn team, even with Emily in the future, or even if you're talking about a Nilou Bloom team, if you put Baizhu on that team, 50 of those max HP, if you can get to 50,000 max HP, he's going to get 50 times that 2%, which is 100% damage increase on your bloom cores, on hyper bloom cores, on burgeon cores, anything really that you're going to be doing to explode them or do anything with those bloom cores turning into hyper blooms and burgeons. The burning damage itself will be adding that reaction damage to 100% as well. Also, things like Aggravate and Spread, the reason why those are down to 0.8% instead of the 2% is because Aggravate and Spread are already buffed through the Quicken or Catalyze reaction, so Aggravate and Spread already kind of have a natural buff to them, so that's why they're down to the 0.8%, but it's still at 50 times that 0.8%. It's still a 40% damage increase for those on top of whatever you're doing for those Aggravate and Spread hits. Now, this does last for 6 seconds, but each time that you are getting healed by these Seamless Shields, it's basically refreshing that cooldown. So looking a little bit beyond this, talking about his weapons, looking at weapons in general, he does have his personal 5-star weapon. Jadefall Splendor does have a main stat of HP percent at 49.6% at level 90, which is going to be extremely good, especially once again when talking about that buff that he can give in his second passive talent, as well as just honestly most of the healing that he can get through his kit. And like normal, we're not going to be talking about the actual weapon just because the ability and the main stat, everything is obviously his specific character as a limited 5-star character, so he's going to have everything for it. This is a very good weapon if you have it, but I wouldn't necessarily say, actually my personal opinion, to really be going after this weapon, especially if, you know, this weapon, if you don't have Baizhu, isn't really great for most other characters. It is nice just once again for the main stat, but if the other banner is a character that you don't have the weapon on, I would not say to risk trying to get Jadefall Splendor for Baizhu if you can kind of lose and get the other weapon and kind of be stuck with a weapon for a character you don't have. Although this is a really, really good 5-star weapon for him, he does have some plenty other good options to use. For instance, talking about some other 4-star options that he can use, Prototype Amber, the weapon I have on him, is probably the most widely used weapon, in my personal opinion, for most people, especially once you can get into higher refinements from this weapon. It does have a main stat of HP percent, and at level 90, this will give 41.3% HP. Now, keeping this in mind, the ability is extremely good, and that's why getting higher refinements to it is even better. At Refinement 1, though, it states that using an Elemental Burst regenerates 4 energy every 2 seconds for 6 seconds. So basically, over the span of 6 seconds, you'll be getting 12 energy back. That's really, really good. Also, all party members will generate 4% HP every 2 seconds for this duration that is also going on 3 times, which means also another 12% HP that each character is getting healed. So never mind his full party heals, but also this weapon is extremely helping him when in terms of actually healing as well. Now, at Refinement 5, this goes to 6 elemental energy every 2 seconds and 6% HP. So there is some pretty nice, interesting buffs that this weapon can give, especially at some higher refinements. Honestly, this is just a solid weapon. Even at R1, I would just say this is probably his best in slot compared to, and only second to his personal weapon. Another weapon you could use is Fav Codex. Because he is so necessary, I guess, more or less, on getting his burst back consistently, making sure that you're always having the burst, it's really just more or less, number one, for application for, once again, non-main Dendro carries, but also just in general, having to make sure that you're always having the healing constantly going throughout teams, especially the teams that you might be pairing with Farina. The constant small bits of healing to counteract her constant draining of healing from the full party is going to be extremely good, so both these characters are going to be working pretty well together, but once again, that's a team section thing. This weapon is pretty good, Fav Codex. I would say that you kind of do want some extra crit with this weapon, especially just to give more party energy. So if you do want some more energy for the entire party and you're kind of lacking in that aspect, or personally, Baizhu just doesn't have a lot of energy either, maybe your stats just aren't that great, you could just go for this weapon instead. Beyond that as well, you could go for the Hakushin Ring, which was an event weapon. It is an ER weapon as well. It does have a main set of ER. It's at level 90 at 30.6% energy recharge, and it does have an okay, ability as well to go for, but personally, that is an older event weapon, and it's kind of like putting Festering Desire on Farina. There are some other weapons that you can use instead, so if you are a veteran, you do have some of those weapons, and you were here for those events, you can use that weapon, but in my personal opinion, I would still state that the best weapon for him, even as a 4-star, is still going to be Prototype Amber at any refinement. Looking a little bit beyond the actual weapons, let's go ahead and talk about artifacts. Now, there are two major sets that you can use for him. In my personal opinion, there is the one set of Deepwood Memories, or you can be using Ocean Hued Clam, which, as I've stated in a previous video, for most healers is going to be a pretty good set. Now, with Deepwood Memories, the reason why is mainly for the 4-piece. You don't once again really care for the extra damage bonus on a character like him who's focusing mostly on healing. In the 4-piece, it states that after elemental skills or bursts hit opponents, the target's Dendro resistance will be decreased by 30% for 8 seconds, and this effect can be triggered even if the equipping character is not on the field, which obviously is going to be extremely nice since his burst is constantly hitting targets, and that'll be refreshing that duration for 8 seconds as well, constantly keeping the enemy's Dendro resistance down by 30%, so that's going to be pretty nice for you. Now, I would like to say, though, about this specific set, you are going to be using this set really if you're using another Dendro carry or looking for another, sub-damage dealer that is going to be a Dendro character. Now, I do want to say with this specific set that even if you're going to be using this set, you're really going to be pairing this with a character that is going to be with Baizhu that you're trying to get a lot of Dendro damage out of. Looking at like a Nilou Bloom team, for instance, mainly, even though you are having, Nilou doing the actual quote-unquote damage there, and it is based off her Super Bloom cores, those are still going to be Dendro numbers, and so that Dendro resistance is still going to be good for this 4-piece, but if you are running Nahida in that team, once again, only one of these effects can really be used at one time, so these effects can't stack through multiple characters, so keeping that in mind, you don't have to actually worry about having this set on him. If you have Nahida or Yao Yao or Kale or Dendro main character and you're using this set on them already, I would say to actually go for the other set, which is going to be Ocean Hued Clam. Now, the reason why this set is extremely good, never mind the 2-piece of just giving healing bonus, but we've talked about this in the past where it's just an extra damage help in the 4-piece, which isn't necessarily crazy good, but every once in a while for the constant healing that you're doing, especially on this team, especially on these characters, which you're doing, probably getting hit around a lot, the whole reason you really want to use up an entire slot for a healer is that you're probably getting hit a lot or your HP is just dropping a lot. There is a lot of extra damage instances that you can get out of this just by getting a Seed Dyed Foam damage hit, based on the amount of healing that you've accumulated up to that point in time. It is based off a 30,000 HP pool, so once again, that is going to be something nice for you. It's just basically an extra damage hit that's just based off your healing. It's not really based on anything else. So if you do a bunch of healing in one rotation, that 4-piece is going to be pretty nice for you. But as you can see here, most people are going to be using the Deepwood Memories set and use Nahida with him just for a little bit more difference for maybe her to go on a more damage focused set like Gilded or something like that. Or like me, this just allows you to not have Nahida in the team and actually allow you to run different characters. If you were going to be running someone like Alhaitham with him and you don't have Nahida, then you could use this instead to basically be what Nahida would be wearing for you instead. This could also be helpful for characters like Kaveh, once again talking about the Nilou Bloom teams. This set's just a nice set to have in general with him, but a combination of, as you can see here, the 2-piece Tenacity and 2-piece 4 Akashas, because of their HP percent 2-piece sets, they're going to be extremely good for you, and they'll make sure that if you're really losing any energy recharge, either in, the weapon or in main stats or in substats, if your energy recharge is pretty low, trying to find energy recharge in those areas instead can allow you to actually go for the 2-piece HP percent sets to basically buff your HP while still going into energy recharge. Now, keeping in mind looking at main stats of the different artifacts that you're going to want, personally for me, I'm going to say go for an energy recharge Sands. This is probably going to be best for you because once again, trying to get that burst back almost on every single rotation is going to be really nice for you. Having that 80 energy cost can be a little bit of a pain, but usually you're running him in double Dendro teams, so having an energy recharge Sands with another Dendro character who has a pretty good amount of energy recharge, you should be fine in getting your burst back. Maybe not every single perfect rotation, but it should be close. And you're going to be looking at an HP percent Goblet and an HP percent Circlet. If you do have an ER weapon, then I would say to go for either triple HP, or if you have Fav Codex, go for an HP percent Sands, an HP percent Goblet, and a crit rate Circlet to allow your weapon to basically carry all the energy recharge that you can really have. While doing that though, you're basically going to be looking at trying to get energy recharge and HP percent wherever you can in your substats here. So obviously in your flower and your feather, you can go for energy recharge and HP percent on what you can here. And then for your sands, if it is energy recharge, look for HP percent. Vice versa if they need to be. On your HP percent goblet, look for energy recharge. And elemental mastery is not terrible, but I would heavily just once again suggest going after the energy recharge. And if you do have a crit rate circlet, going after a lot of crit rate to go for Fav Codex, look for crit rate as well in your stats and where you can find them. But once again, if you are going for the normal route of him going on an HP weapon, go for an HP percent circlet and then go for the energy recharge and the substats as well. Looking a little bit further past stats and actual main stats as well as sets, we're going to be looking at constellations. For me, before we jump into this, I am not a huge fan of really going for constellations before going for weapons. So if you are thinking about getting a weapon if you are thinking about getting constellations on Baizhu, which in my personal opinion, I don't think he needs any of them. I think he's a great character without them. And even with constellations, nothing really, spikes him as a character to put him in certain teams and whatnot. So I think he's an extremely good character at C0, R0. But if you are thinking about going for anything, I would just go for the weapon before you go for constellations. But like I said before, you really don't have to go for anything as long as you just have him by himself. The first constellation states that it gives another charge of his skill. Once again, we already saw that it does have a 10-second cooldown, so to have two of those plus the burst constant healing, it's really for those teams, especially when you're comparing them with using a Farina in the team who's constantly draining your HP, and you might be getting hit a lot. Maybe using them once again like the team I already was showing you, basically at the beginning of the video where I was using Nivelette as well as Farina. They're constantly changing HP, and especially Nivelette can get some pretty low sometimes, but he brings it up with his actual source water droplets. So it's really just dependent on what teams you have. That Nilou Bloom team, if you really just need the extra healing. The C1's not necessarily a bad constellation to go for, but it would be really not necessary in my personal opinion. Once again, all these constellations are really not necessary for him as a character. Looking at the C2, it states that when your active character hits a nearby opponent with their attacks, Baizhu will unleash a Gossamer Sprite Splice. This Splice will initiate one attack before returning, dealing 250% of Baiju's attack as Dendro damage and healing for 20% of the skill's Gossamer Sprite's normal healing. The damage dealt this way is considered elemental skill damage, and this effect can be triggered once every 5 seconds. This is based off of really trying to change you into turning a little bit from kind of what you can do with Zhongli, where he's shield botting as well as doing a lot of damage, and you can kind of, mix and match with him. It's kind of similar here. Once you get to later constellations, you can start to see Baizhu actually doing healing as well as damage, and it really can kind of jump between the two. As well as we see through his kit, he kind of goes into damage bonus anyways with the Dendro, so there's a lot that he can do once again you get to those later constellations. Once again, when you get to those later constellations, it just depends on what you're actually doing. The third constellation states it increases the level of the burst by 3, and the skill is increased by 3 at the C5. Going back to the C4, it states that for 15 seconds after the burst is used, Baizhu will increase all party members' elemental mastery by 80. If you're thinking about that and trying to figure out how that's going to work for 15 seconds, really looking at the countdown of getting all that elemental mastery, really the biggest thing that you're looking at here, if the entire burst duration is 14 seconds, it's about the same amount of time that you're going to be having those shields created and recreated over and over again in his burst. That's going on for 14 seconds while his burst is active. So this is going to be the same as, it's basically just think that it's about the same amount of time. It's 1 second longer for getting all that elemental mastery help. So as soon as you see those shields go away, you've basically got 1 second of elemental mastery boost, and then it's gone until you use the burst again. Looking at the C6 though, it states that it increases the damage dealt by the burst spirit veins by 8% of Baiju's max HP, once again allowing him to go even more into max HP to allow him to do really good in healing, but also some pretty good damage. Additionally, when a Gossamer Sprite or Gossamer Sprite Splice from one of the constellations hits opponents, there is a 100% chance of generating a shield at this point in time. This effect can only be triggered once by each Gossamer Sprite or Gossamer Sprite Splice. This basically is just allowing more shielding, which once again, in my personal opinion, I don't think is really necessary at all. His shields really aren't anything to write home about. They are something nice and interesting to have for maybe lower enemies, and if once again, you can get enough out of it, they might be able to have some good absorption, but it's nothing like any other character that you have, so I would not use him and think that he is a good shielder unit. I would only really use him once again for the healing aspect that he has. The shields are more or less an interesting kind of way for him to do constant changing of healing, just to allow something with maybe just a leeway background that he has, and the idea of being in Zhongli's terrain maybe. maybe that can be a little bit of something that he's kind of based off of and why he uses shields to a very minimal extent. Now taking a look at some teams that are going to be used for Baizhu. Now this is probably my favorite team running Neuvillette, Furina, Kazuha, and Baizhu. The reason why is because, like I was stating before, Furina is constantly draining everybody's HP at one point in time when she's using her skill. For the damage phase is when she's going to be doing a lot of that damage, but she's also draining everybody's HP. And as we saw, both skills and bursts in Baiju's healing, he's going to be doing constant basically healing among the entire party, which is going to make sure that not only is he healing everybody to stay over the 50% threshold for then Furina to constantly be draining HP to change HP, but also it'll be keeping Furina's constant stacks up, doubling that amount that she can do. So with the constant healing that he's doing, combined with the changes that HP in Furina that she can do, also keeping in mind that Neuvillette at the same time is changing his HP multiple times while he's doing damage, is extremely good for this entire team. Now, a lot of people use Jean in this slot instead, and that is kind of the standard character for this team, but Baizhu is probably the best character for this position, in my personal opinion, for what we're doing here in this team. This is another team that you could be using. Once again, as I talked about previously, with that 4-piece that I have on him currently being Deepwood and dropping Dendro resistance on enemies when they're hit by elemental skills or burst, Baizhu is going to be hitting multiple enemies with his skills, up to 3, and with his burst, he's constantly hitting multiple opponents when he's off-field, even on-field or whatever, so by constantly doing that, he's constantly proccing on enemies, the Dendro resistance decrease on them, which is allowing Alhaitham in this specific team to do more damage. He's going to be extremely good in this sense to not only just help basically heal the team as well, which is going to be nice, but also compared to using that extra Dendro resistance buff that you can get for Alhaitham by decreasing enemies' Dendro resistance for him. This doesn't really work in terms of characters that are maybe going to be focusing more on their personal damage. That is not the same element as Baizhu. So characters like Sino or whatever aren't really going to be making a lot of use out of this. But another team that can work and works extremely well is going to be the Nilou Bloom team. Usually paired with Baizhu at this point in time for this specific team, the quote-unquote best team that you can do with it is going to be Nilou, Nahida, and Baizhu, usually throwing in another character in there, and it could be really any at that point, but I think one of the best characters for that would be something like Kokomi because of the constant hydro from off-field. Honestly, in general, anything, he fits really, really good in a Nilou Bloom team. So if you want to use him in that sense as well, if you have that team or you're getting Nilou in one of the upcoming patches, having Baizhu built for that specific team is going to be extremely good for you as well. And if you are thinking about going more into Dendro, he's not a terrible character to pick up either. Even looking here at one of these teams right here, once I get Nahida, I'm going to be kicking out Kuki in this slot because Baiju's already a great healer, and all I really need is constant electro application from off-field, and if I can get Nahida in here, she's going to be buffing everybody's extra damage. Yaimeiko's going to be doing more damage, Alhaitham's going to be doing more damage, Baizhu even himself is going to be doing more damage, so I would say that Baizhu is a really, really good character when it comes to Dendro-specific teams. Even other teams like Chloran, for instance, when you're pairing them with Chloran and using Nahida to kind of buff her EM so that she can do aggravate damage, once again, that passive talent is helping spread, aggravate any Dendro reaction based off of his max HP. So that's going to be extremely good for Sino, Catching going on aggravate build, Chloran going on an aggravate build, Sino on Hyperbloom or aggravate, Alhaitham going this way. You could even talk about looking at a Hyperbloom Raiden, Kuki Hyperblooms that she could be doing if I switched out a character here, going on a Hyperbloom route, switching Yelan here. I've done this as well. Never mind, once again, the Dendro resonance that you're getting from these two characters, helping more Hyperbloom damage do more, helping the Bloom damage do more, helping the spread damage do more. He's a great buffer as well as he is a great healer, and he can technically put out some okay damage by himself as well. So he's an extremely good character, like I've stated before, and kind of beat it to death. So it kind of depends on what you're going to be doing with him, but he really is just built for the full-blown healing route. Well, that's everything I've got talking about Baizhu. If you guys did like the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. And if you guys do have any other ways that you kind of build your Baizhu or different ways that you kind of put them together in your teams, please go ahead and let me know down in the comments. That's everything I've got for this video, so I'll see you guys in the next one.